This is the third and final lecture on Miguel Roig-Francoli's Harmony in Context, Chapter 2. In the first lecture in Chapter 2, I introduced the term authentic cadence and also the term half cadence to you. I'd like to say a little bit more about cadences, and then we'll move on from there. There are two different kinds of authentic cadences. And remember, an authentic cadence is a 5 going to a 1. More broadly, it's some kind of dominant function chord going to a tonic chord. The 7 diminished chord is usually considered to be a dominant function chord, so you can have an authentic cadence with a 7 diminished, but we'll be getting into that a little bit later. Authentic cadences come in two different varieties. There's a perfect authentic cadence and also an imperfect authentic cadence. I know it sounds like a value judgment, and I guess it is. In order for an authentic cadence to be a perfect authentic cadence, it has to have 3 features, and it has to have all of them. Okay, so in a perfect authentic cadence, the final tonic chord is in root position, the soprano or melody note of that tonic chord is Do, scale degree 1, and the chord that precedes the final tonic chord is a root position 5 triad or a root position 5/7 chord. Okay, and so with all 3 of those, you have a perfect authentic cadence. Here are some examples. If you have an authentic cadence, but if it lacks any one of these 3 things, or more than one of them, then we would say it is an imperfect authentic cadence. The effect, while still resolving the 5 and giving a feeling of arrival on the tonic, nevertheless is less conclusive. Here are some examples of imperfect authentic cadences. Here's one where we don't go to a root position 1 chord. Here's an example where we don't have a root position 5/7 chord. Here's an example where we go to a 1 chord with a different note in the soprano. And just for your information, these cadences are commonly abbreviated this way. Apart from knowing the terminology, you should also know these abbreviations. Now, I'd like to turn to example 2.5a, which is on page 140 of your textbook. This is a Bach chorale harmonization, and it's in 2 phrases. The first 8 beats, going up to beat 3 of measure 2, constitute the first phrase, and then the rest of it is all another phrase. A phrase is a segment of music that concludes with a cadence. Generally, a phrase will start on tonic and move through other chords on the way to a cadence. It's not possible to have a phrase that only consists of a tonic chord, because that way you don't actually have a cadence at the end of it. You need a 5 chord somewhere, either to make an authentic cadence or to be the final chord of a half cadence. In chorale harmonizations, the fermata symbol is generally used to show the endings of phrases. Let's listen to this, and as you listen to this, hear the difference in effect between the imperfect authentic cadence that we have first and the perfect authentic cadence that we have at the end. You can hear that the second cadence is more conclusive. It sounds more like the real ending of the piece. The cadence in measure 2 is an arrival, but it's less conclusive. Miguel Roy Frankly has a brief discussion of this in the textbook. He notes that the tonic in measure 2, that is here on the third beat, is the tonal goal of the phrase, and it does resolve the preceding 5 chord. But it sounds less than fully conclusive because mi and not do is in the soprano. However, at the end of the example, the perfect authentic cadence has a clearly conclusive character because of the re-do motion of the soprano. Example 2.5a is an example of a musical period, and this is a term that you need to know. A period is a formal unit of 2 phrases, occasionally of 3, in which the first phrase ends in a less conclusive cadence and the second phrase ends in a more conclusive cadence. So a period is a larger structure that incorporates 2 phrases, and it has this pattern of an open ending and then a closed ending, a less conclusive cadence, and then a more conclusive cadence. You could think of it as being a sentence that has a comma in the middle and that then ends with a punctuation mark of a period. Don't get those two confused. Now let's listen to example 2.5b. It's very similar to the previous example, except that now, midway through the example, we have a half cadence, not an authentic cadence of any kind. Now, you may have heard this half cadence as being a little bit more conclusive than you might expect. And I would suggest that that's because of the C sharps in the measure. It's almost as if we have modulated or changed keys into the key of D. So this has a lot of features of a 5-7 chord in D major going to a 1 chord in D major. Listen to it again and be careful that you retain G in your ear as the tonic so that you're not hearing the D major chord under the first fermata as a tonic chord, but rather as a dominant chord. This is also an example of a period. Here, the first cadence is really quite inconclusive, the half cadence, notwithstanding the C sharps and the feeling that maybe the D is a temporary tonic chord. But the 1 chord at the end is very conclusive. Mr. Roy Frankly makes the very good point that we can understand all of example 2.5b as being an expansion of an underlying 1-5-1 progression. So we start on tonic. By the end of the first phrase, we've moved to a dominant. And although we do get to a tonic chord again, the dominant is not quite resolved. And it's not until the final cadence that we have a dominant that goes to a tonic. So the overall structure of this is a 1-5-1. It's not uncommon in music to have the same structures that exist at the local level and then also at a larger level. So looking at the beginning of this, we have a 1 triad and then a first inversion 5 triad and then another 1 triad. So that's a 1-5-1 at a very small local level within a single measure. On a larger scale, in the first 4 measures, we have this overarching 1-5-5-1 progression. This is part of what makes tonal music, I think, interesting and powerful and very revealing to study, because you can often find these organic connections between the small scale and the large scale. This concludes the lectures on Chapter 2. I will see you next time for exciting Chapter 3 lectures.